Our second reading today is from the book of Hebrews, the 11th chapter. The 11th chapter, as well as part of the 12th, chronicle the heroes of faith from the beginning all the way down to the time of the New Testament. I will be reading the first two verses and then the 8th through the 16th verses. Listen for God's word to us today. Now, faith is the assurance of things hoped for, the conviction of things not seen. Indeed, by faith, our ancestors received approval. By faith, Abraham obeyed when he was called to set out for a place that he was to receive as an inheritance, and he set out, not knowing where he was going. By faith, he stayed for a time in the land he had been promised, as in a foreign land, living in tents, as did Isaac and Jacob, who were heirs with him of the same promise. For he looked forward to the city that has foundations, whose architect and builder is God. By faith, he received power of procreation, even though he was too old, and Sarah herself was barren, because he considered him faithful who had promised. Therefore, from one person, and this one as good as dead, descendants were born, as many as the stars of the heaven, and as innumerable grains of sand by the seashore. All of these died in faith without having received the promises. For from a distance they saw and greeted them. They confessed they were strangers and foreigners on the earth. For people who speak in this way make it clear that they are seeking a homeland. If they'd been thinking of the land that they had left behind, they would have had the opportunity to return. But as it is, they desire a better country, that is, a heavenly one. Therefore, God is not ashamed to be called their God. Indeed, he has prepared a city for them. This is the word of the Lord.
Thanks be to God.
The Peanut Butter Falcon is the feel-good movie of the year. It's the endearing story of a young man with Down syndrome, Zach, who runs away from the residential care facility where he lives. Zach is following his dream of becoming a professional wrestler. Along the way, he makes friends with Tyler, another young man, down on his luck and on the run. They go on a journey together. Eleanor is sent by the residential facility to find Zach. They are lost. They are found. It's ultimately a story of redemption. Along the way, it's also a hero's story. A hero's story follows a particular pattern. Someone goes on a journey. In the beginning, it's usually an ordinary person, just like you and me. What makes them a hero is not what they bring to the journey, but what happens along the way. There are challenges and difficulties to be overcome. The hero discovers help from an unexpected source, often a friend or a mentor. Finally, they return home or arrive at their destination, but not before they are changed. Often those around them are changed as well, and it is the process of change that makes them a hero. So the Peanut Butter Falcon is a hero story, but more importantly, the story of making the movie is a hero story. The star of the movie is Zach Gottsagen, a young man with Down syndrome. His dream since he was a child was to be an actor. Growing up, he attended a magnet school for the performing arts to prepare for his career in acting. And then a few years ago, he met the makers of the movie while he was attending a camp for young people with special needs. Zach told Nielsen and Schwartz that he wanted to be a movie actor. And they were very realistic, telling Zach, well, there are not many parts for people with Down syndrome in movies. So Zach told them that they ought to write one for him, and he would star in it. Not really knowing what they were agreeing to, they said yes. Zach was on a hero's journey. He was following his calling. He found help with Nielsen and Schwartz. They worked for years, writing around Zach's interests and abilities. Professional wrestling, swimming, and peanut butter. Sometimes they were living in tents just to get along as they wrote this story. They found unexpected help when a Hollywood star posted a New Year's Eve resolution on Twitter that he wanted to help someone in the new year. They quickly messaged him and said, if you're serious about helping someone, then can you help us get this script made into a movie? He got the script as an email. He looked at it 10 minutes later. He said, yes, I will help. Along the way, friendships were made. Lives were changed. Love was discovered. Zach is even more committed to becoming a movie actor. Nielsen and Schwartz are now proven movie makers. And often troubled actor Shia LaBeouf is sober, crediting Zach for having made real to him the love of God. Real life, real changes. Chapter 11 of the book of Hebrews is about the heroes of faith that lived real lives. From the first family of creation down to the time of the early church, people of faith are remembered for their willingness to go on a journey, to go on the journey of faith. These are men and women, kings and servants, conquerors and the persecuted, all remembered for their faithfulness in seeking to follow God's will for their lives. These are people who went out into the world every day in faith, faced the challenges of life, some ordinary, some extraordinary, found the help that they needed, persevered, arrived at the end of their journey changed by God. Consider Abram and Sarah. They answered the call of God. They took a journey not certain of the destination, not really knowing where they were going. They left their homeland in faith, confident that God was going to lead them somewhere. They faced challenges along the way. They lived as foreigners, aliens in a strange land, looking for a homeland and dealing with perhaps the greatest uncertainty whether Sarah would ever have a child. They trusted in the promise of God. The birth of Isaac was the fulfillment of the promise of children. It changed their lives. They found a homeland on the earth, but the promise of a homeland in God remained unfulfilled. Every year, on the first Sunday of November, we pause to remember all the saints who've come before us, who've passed on in the journey of faith. They followed the call of God. They set forth on a journey, trusting in the promises of God. They served as they heard God's call. Dentists, builders, nurses, educators, business people, homemakers, family members, and members of the family of God. All faced their challenges, all found help along the way, all persevered in trusting the promises of God. They changed others along the way, and they were changed in the process. They laughed, they cried, they celebrated, and now rest in the promises of God, even as we await the hope of the city that is in God, the hope of peace on earth, the hope of justice for all, the hope of the fulfillment of a homeland of love in Christ. At times, the book of Hebrews soars poetically, talking about those who have gone before us as a great cloud of witnesses that surrounds us as if we were Olympians, performing heroically on the field of competition in the grand stadium of life. Other times, Hebrews speaks of very ordinary living. It encourages Christians not to get tired of coming to church. It encourages Christians to encourage each other to do good. It encourages Christians to show hospitality to strangers, for they might be messengers of God in disguise. It offers a gentle reminder that the heroes of faith were often wanderers in the world in need of the hospitality of strangers. So let me tell you a story. The story of a man in need of the hospitality of a stranger. Starts almost 30 years ago. The year was 1990. Mohammed Ghanem was on a journey. He was in Washington, D.C. to attend a scientific conference, but he was from the country of Kuwait, which had just been invaded by Saddam Hussein. He knew he couldn't go back home. So he left his wife and 3 children with a friend in London where he changed planes. Ghanem was hoping to get a job from someone at the conference so he could move his family to the United States, the land of opportunity. Instead, everyone at the conference told him he was at the wrong conference. He needed to come back next week. All of his cash assets were frozen in Kuwait. He was out of money. He was living on the free apples in the hotel lobby. All he had was a return ticket to London in a couple of days. He did have this one friend in Milwaukee and thought if he could get there and arrange a job interview the next week in Washington, he might have a chance. Of course, he was from a small country and had no idea that there was a long way from Washington, D.C. to Milwaukee. He was on a journey and things looked bleak. In a moment of desperation, Ghanem walked into a travel agency. The man at the counter said, "Can I help you?" Ghanem said, "I'm struggling." "I see you're black. You know about struggles. I need help." And out spilled the whole story. War in Kuwait, family in London, friend in Milwaukee. He wanted to reschedule his return ticket to London by way of Milwaukee and come back through Washington, D.C., so that he could attend the conference next week. The agent, Jimmy Dorsey, had heard some crazy stories. Fortunately, he was a kind man. Knowing that it would cost him his job if it was discovered, he rescheduled the ticket by way of Milwaukee. and he took $80 out of his wallet and handed it to Ghanem, saying, "Here, you need some spending money." The next week, Ghanem had 2 interviews, got a job, moved his family to the United States. The hospitality of a stranger changed their lives. Jimmy Dorsey was the unexpected help in the journey of life. But the story does not really end there. You see, today, Dr. Ghanem is the director of the Center of Mycology at Case Western University and a world-leading researcher in probiotics. He's told the story of the kindness of a stranger for years, but earlier this year, it dawned on his son that maybe they could go on the internet and find this person. So they posted, only knowing that it was 1990 and this was a travel agent in downtown Washington, because Ghanem couldn't remember anything else about the situation. A writer from the Washington Post heard about it, got involved, wrote an article. It turned up some leads. One woman remembered that she had a boss at a travel agency in downtown Washington, D.C. about that time, and he was particularly generous. He had been a volunteer firefighter. That's all she could really remember. That led eventually to Jimmy Dorsey, a Vietnam veteran, volunteer firefighter, a volunteer football coach. Jimmy, unfortunately, died earlier this year. But his wife still remembers the night that Jimmy asked if she had some extra cash. He had given everything in his wallet to a stranger off the street. Not only that, but he did some things in the office to rearrange flights, and he hoped he didn't lose his job. Elaine just shook her head and let it go. Jimmy was always doing something like that, showing hospitality to strangers, doing good deeds, helping others along life's way. Jimmy never knew the impact that his kindness had on the Ghanem family. He did not know that his help that day would change the course of medical research. He didn't know that he would be remembered as a hero and a saint. He just tried to be faithful every day. May we do as much on the journey of faith. And may we receive the help we need from all the saints that walk with us until we find our home in God. Thanks be to God.